Be sure to check out MythVisionPodcast.com. Help MythVision grow, guys. Become a Patreon member. You guys will get early access to all of my videos when I'm done editing them. Also, it's a small community where you guys can message me your questions and talk to me in private. You guys can donate also through PayPal. Join our social media links down in the description. We have Twitter and Facebook groups. Help the community of MythVision grow. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell button so you're notified every time I do a live video and you don't miss any of my content. Like this video and comment your thoughts below because I want to know what you think about all of these things.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. Thank you guys for checking out the show today. I have Dr. Samuel Zinner with us today, and we're going to be going into the first century common era, and second century, if you will, but definitely into the war times, the apocalyptic scenario that the Jews are having in their minds. They're very messianic in nature, but also there are a lot of wars going on between Rome and the Jews. We know this from Josephus, but there's an interesting character we would like to bring to the table, and Dr. Samuel Zinner is going to do that. Welcome to the show, Dr. Zinner.
Thank you.
Guys, go down in the description. Check out his links. He's got a YouTube channel. Go subscribe to his channel. Make sure you guys help that. He's growing it now, so his content's not out there, but he's going to be producing content more and more on his YouTube channel, as well as check out his academia.edu. He's got thousands and thousands of pages of written material for you guys to look at some of the investigative work he's done on researching a lot of these topics that you guys, as well as myself, are fascinated with. So, to Simon Bar Kokhba, is it Simon Bar Kokhba? I believe
Simon
it is.
or Shimon.
Okay,
we can say Simon in English.
Shimon Bar Kokhba. Anyway, the star, Simon the Star. So, tell us about this guy, because honestly, I've not done one show on MythVision where we talk about this guy. This is one of the messiahs in some Jewish thought. So, tell me about this gentleman and what's so important about him, what took place in this time in history, why is it relevant? I don't know, just start somewhere with this if you don't mind.
But to set the context, you have to go back to the first century, first Jewish war, 67 to after 70 of the Common Era, right? And so we all know from Josephus how that ended, right? And it's very probable that Jews, as the decades passed, right, as the 70-year mark was approaching, right, that some Jews, especially of a militaristic, messianic mindset, were probably expecting something apocalyptic to happen, right, based on Tanakh precedent. Right, the trope of the 70 years that have to pass, right, before exile will end, right, and you have the figure 70 is prominent in the book of Daniel, the apocalyptic book of Daniel, for instance. So after 70 of the Common Era, after the temple was destroyed by the Romans, right, here now it's 115, 117 of the Common Era under Trajan, right? We have the Kaitos Wars in Egypt, which decimated Jewry in Alexandria, right? So this was sort of an interim war before, right? Now we passed that. Now we go up to the 130s. Right, specifically 132 is when the Bar Kokhba revolt began. This is also called the Second Jewish War. Right, so the Kaitos War is rarely referred to as the Second Jewish War. It's usually that's usually reserved for the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 CE. A lot of the literature, especially the older literature, you'll see that 132 to 135. But more recently, right, we're pushing it up to 136, right? So 132, 136 is the second Jewish war against Rome, and it is unsuccessful, just as the first one was. Right. Now, Shimon Bar Kokhba is shrouded in mystery because he didn't have a Josephus, right, who could write his history, right, in the time following the events, soon following the events. Right, so we're dependent on much later sources, right? So it's shrouded in mystery, but right, we can put a lot of this together, and historians have, especially in recent years. There's been a revival of interest in Shimon Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba, right, Aramaic, literally, it could mean son of the star, but it's actually just an idiom here, bar, like Hebrew Ben, and what it means, it simply is the star, Shimon or Simon the star, right? And so that's how he's referred to in the ancient literature. This is based on, right, a very famous prophecy in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, 24:17, out of a star will come out of Jacob. I'm sure most, all of your listeners are aware of this prophecy. Now, that's interesting. A star, right, which in Aramaic, again, is Kokhba, right, will come out of Jacob, Yaakov, right, because in the Talmudic literature, right, the records about Bar Kokhba mention that it was the famous Rabbi Akiva who proclaimed Bar Kokhba the Messiah. So what is the connection there? The Aramaic, or Akiva, is simply an Aramaic form of the Hebrew name Jacob, Yaakov, right? So it's like a very literal application of this prophecy. A star, Kokhba, will come out of Jacob. So Bar Kokhba will come out of, that is, will be announced by Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Akiva is a very important person in rabbinic Judaism. He's associated with, even with esoteric traditions and esoteric interpretations of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's, like anticipations of later Kabbalah, for instance, right? So
is he contemporaneous? Is he contemporaneous with Bar Kokhba?
Well, yes. So I mean, that's what it means, that he proclaimed Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah. So that's while he was living, right? While Bar Kokhba, yes. So they were probably more or less the same age. I mean, we can't know, but they're from the same time period and they're operating together. And Rabbi Akiva is the one who endorses Shimon Bar Kokhba as the Messiah. Now, the Talmud tells us that other rabbis objected and said, well, Rabbi Akiva, grass is going to be growing over your grave, right, before the Messiah comes. But a lot of these Talmudic traditions, we are probably not all that historical. They probably are more, they're there more for teaching lessons, right? Making theological points, what have you. In any case, those are the traditions. The Bar Kokhba revolt begins in 132. Historians debate a lot about what was the proximate cause, what set off the rebellion. And personally, I subscribe to the theory that Emperor Hadrian now, right, in leading up to 132, made it known that he wanted to rename, right, the conquered and destroyed city of Jerusalem after his own clan, and that, to name it Aelia Capitolina, right, after his clan name Aelius. And so, right, so this is basically meaning a paganization, right, of the destroyed city of Jerusalem, and this was just too much, right, for Jews to stomach. Right? It's very similar to what happened before the first Jewish war, and it's also similar to what happened even earlier in the 40s with Emperor Caligula, who threatened to set up his statue, right? A statue of himself, or some deity, Greco-Roman deity in the temple, right? And that would have led to war had not the emperor died before it devolved into that. So a lot of scholars think that it was only after the Bar Kokhba revolt quashed, after it ended, that Hadrian decided to rename Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. But I think more scholars are now positing it's actually he did that earlier, and that was the reason the war started. Right? And so it would just be coincidence, right, that it was coming up on that 70 years, right, more or less after the destruction of the temple in 70 of the Common Era. So messianically, militaristically minded Jews were probably keeping an eye out. It's like, well, it's what we would call the year 140 of the Common Era would then be 70. So in other words, everything would be finished before 70 years passed, right? So 132, right? You're in the final decade, right? So that was the thinking. All right. So this Shimon Bar Kokhba, right? The church fathers write that he presented himself as some Messiah, as the Messiah who had descended from heaven, right? As the star, fulfilling Numbers 24:17, a star will come out of Jacob, right? And most scholars doubt that, right? They'll say, well, this Shimon, Kosibah was his name, Bar Kokhba, did not think of himself as the Messiah. This is something that was imputed to him years after the event. What a lot of people think about Jesus, right? Well, a lot of scholars don't think he actually claimed to be the Messiah, but years later, people made that claim for him, right? And then put it into his mouth. All right. But in any case, even those scholars who do think that Bar Kokhba thought of himself as the Messiah will claim that, well, by Messiah, he meant just some military Messiah that's fighting for the restoration of autonomy, right, for Judea. And he wouldn't have been thought of along the lines of like the New Testament Messiah, right? But in fact, if you look at more or less contemporary Jewish literature, like the books known as 4 Ezra, 2nd Baruch, you will see that actually this is how Jews were thinking about the Messiah to come. He is a messianic figure that comes from heaven and descends and carries out the war, right, and crushes the enemies of God, and that is Rome, right? And that's, in fact, what you see in the book of Revelation, right? When Jesus returns, according to Revelation, he's going to be the same type of figure. He's this warrior Messiah with the sword, which is the word of God, which is, right, reflects the Torah, right? And he comes down and destroys the enemies of God, which in the book of Revelation is also the Roman Empire, right? The pagan Roman emperor and the pagan religion of Rome, right? So to me, it makes perfect sense that the church fathers actually were spot on this. Bar Kokhba did think of himself, or he was thought of as this celestial Messiah who descends, right? And fulfills the messianic prophecy. So he's just not a regular human being. There's something special and celestial about him. Right? How that all works out on a daily level, who knows? But that was sort of the theological, Christological, or if you will, messianic way of thinking. You see it there in 4 Ezra and 2nd Baruch. So this is our best evidence for how people would have thought of Bar Kokhba. He would be like the Messiah that we read about in that more or less contemporary Second Temple apocalyptic literature. Right? Now it's interesting. Bar Kokhba government, if you will, or this revolt, they actually started minting their own coins. So we have a lot of Bar Kokhba coinage. Now, what we see in a lot of it is that he abbreviates his name. His name is Shimon. Right? It doesn't say Bar Kokhba on the coinage. On the coinage, you only see his name, his birth name, right? Shimon, Simon, right? And that's from the verb, right, to hear in Hebrew, to hear, right? Now, what Shimon did on his coinage was he abbreviated his name with the letters Shin, Mem, Ayin, which then actually spells the imperative of here, that is here, right? And that's the first word in the Jewish daily profession of monotheistic faith, known as the Shema Yisrael, which is taken from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, which opens Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Right? So that Shema, I mean, and that's what to this day Jews call that profession. It's the Shema. You just call it the Shema. So this is how, and that's cognate, right, with Shimon's name. So he was abbreviating his name on his coins in order to make a link with the daily profession of monotheistic faith. So he was a warrior. He was a symbol of Jewish monotheism, a warrior for Jewish monotheism. But I personally think it went deeper. Because if you look in the Gospels, you will see that the Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, is the basis of the dominant Christian doctrine of the Messiah, right? Who is put on sort of a celestial, almost divine level, right? And the way that's done is you see that in the Gospels, it links. I don't want to go too far into this, but this has reverberations even into medieval Kabbalah, right? But it's very interesting. The first, I'll try to be very quick about this. In 1 John 5, there's a famous interpolation, right? Which is the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. Famous interpolation known as the Johannine comma, right? The fact is that in the medieval era, Kabbalistic Jews took that language and used it in their own Kabbalistic writings and applied it, right, to the three highest of the Sefirot, right, which are these realms within the divine nature, right? And so it's sort of their response to the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, right? Say, well, you say the three are one. Well, we say the three are one too, but it's not the Father, Word, and Holy Spirit. It's the Jewish Kabbalistic, right? The three highest realms of the divinity, right? So they appropriate the Christian language for specifically and distinctly Jewish ideas, just the way that earlier the Christians had appropriated Jewish language from the Tanakh, right, for distinctly Christian ideas that were unacceptable to Judaism. In any case, now, the Shema says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You have two instances, two mentions of Lord, right? So what the Christians did was they linked that with the two instances of Lord in Psalm 110. The Lord said unto my Lord, right? And in the Gospels, that's interpreted as, well, the Lord, that is God, said unto my Lord, the Messiah. So the Messiah is also Lord, right? There's a lot that can be said about that. It's not as open and shut case as Christians might think, but in any case, I think that the Bar Kokhba coins can be coordinated with this. He is linking his name to the Jewish profession of faith, and the later medieval Kabbalah, when it when it talks about humanity in divine terms, or even the Messiah in some divine terms, right, in a very different sense than Christian theology does. But and I can't go too far into this because this is esoteric law and a very sacred teaching, right, in Jewish mysticism. But I think that Bar Kokhba was actually hinting, right, that he is, right, to be associated with the divine name, right, the Tetragrammaton in the daily profession of faith, right. So the Messiah is second mention of Lord in the Tetragrammaton.
Just go back and sentence it to the Messiah. What?
Yeah, so the Messiah is being hinted at in the second mention of Lord, or the Tetragrammaton in the Shema Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. So the idea was that, and in Christian terms, like in the Gospel of John, this was like appropriated, like the Father and I are one, right? So that's interpreting the two instances of Lord in the Shema Israel, right, as the Father and the Son, the Christian Father and the Son. So medieval Kabbalah does something very similar, right, but also very different, but it does something similar. And I think there was an anticipation of this already in the Bar Kokhba revolt, and the Messiah was being thought of as this sort of quasi-divine figure, right, that emanates or originates from God.
That's interesting.
Not in the Christian sense, you know, but you have to understand Jewish mysticism to know what I'm getting at here. So I'm just going to leave that on the level of suggestion, right? But in any case, certainly by creating a link between his name and the Shema Israel, he is presenting himself as a symbol of Jewish monotheism, right? And a warrior for Jewish monotheism as the Messiah. Now, after the revolt was quashed by Rome, and it was much worse, much more devastating than what happened right in the first Jewish war.
Really?
Yes, it was mind-boggling, according to all the sources. It was much worse. The Jewish casualties were far higher, and you know, genocide experts do call it a genocide. What Hadrian did to the Jews when he quashed the Bar Kokhba revolt at a place called Betar, which was the headquarters of Bar Kokhba. It was a tragedy. Just beyond, like figures go in like 1 million dead, you know, and rivers of blood and all of this. Of course, it might be slightly exaggerated, but probably not too much, because even the non-Jewish writers presented this way. It was just a tragedy beyond conception, right? And for Jews, it did become that as well, because with 136, the Common Era, right, Jews then entered into exile for 2 millennia until the creation of the modern state of Israel. So that's what did it, right? They never recovered, right, until the 20th century.
Wow.
Right. But there's something interesting about this. If you want to think about the so-called Jewish Christians, right, followers of Jesus, probably didn't even call themselves Christians, but followers of Jesus who remain faithful to the Torah, right, and to circumcision and the kashrut, the dietary laws. Thomas Witulski has written, is a German scholar, has written in German, right? This is not translated, but in German, he's written. And he's argued that in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, right, we have a famous passage about 2 witnesses who are martyred for God. He claims that these 2 witnesses are actually alluding to Bar Kokhba and his priest Eleazar, Eleazar, the priest, is also mentioned on some of the Bar Kokhba coins. How we know about Eleazar, the priest, right? Because if you're going to try to rebuild the temple, you're going to have a priest, right, a priesthood. Right. In any case, I mean, it's also possible that some of these Jewish followers of Jesus saw Bar Kokhba as the return of Jesus. Right. So it's very possible. And in fact, it was some scholars posit, and they make a good case, in my opinion, that it was a reaction to Bar Kokhba's defeat and his death, that the Jewish idea of suffering Messiah was created, right? The Messiah of Joseph, or the Messiah of Ephraim, so you know, that gives you, that makes for an interesting twist to this story, because the church fathers just flat out demonize Bar Kokhba. Well, so do the later rabbis, because they have to turn him into a false Messiah, because he was defeated, he didn't fulfill the prophecies. But I think that in the years, immediate years after his death, he was probably seen as a national hero and justified through this new trope of the suffering Messiah who falls in battle, right? who is contrasted with the Davidic Messiah, who will be successful in battle, right? So it's sort of like the idea of two messiahs, right? And you have versions of that already at Qumran, right? More than a century before then, or 2 centuries before. Idea of the two messiahs, one Levitical, one royal. So one, and that's, I think, you can connect that right with the John the Baptizer and Jesus. John the Baptizer is the Levitical or the priestly Messiah. Jesus is the royal Messiah, according to one possibility. And in any case, it could be that these Jewish followers of Jesus, or at least some of them, right, actually perhaps may have suspected or hoped that this Bar Kokhba was actually the return of Jesus. Right? I think it's Herman Bettering, he argues that even like in Mark, right, Mark 13, the little apocalypse is sometimes called, when it refers to the deceiver, right, this actually is a reference to Bar Kokhba. So, right, because the rabbis then turned his name Cosibah and played around with it a little bit, changed pronunciation just a little bit to make it sound like the Aramaic word for the liar or the deceiver, right? And so that's how he's known in the Talmudic literature, right? Which is the same. That's the same standard phrase in the Christian tradition for the Antichrist, false prophet, and all this. He is the deceiver, a liar, right? Well, be that as it may, I have my doubts about that because I do suspect, as a growing number of scholars do, that actually, at least the Torah faithful followers of Jesus, some of them actually may have embraced Bar Kokhba, right, and by seeing him as sort of the return of Jesus, perhaps. Well, there you have Bar Kokhba. Right?
So yeah, I guess my comment on this would be, it sounds like to make a claim that this is about the Bar Kokhba revolt in 136 in Mark. I'm not saying it's not possible, because I know Dettering has more extreme views than the common scholar that are out there, and Dr. Price
That's
loves
right, yeah.
checking out his material and stuff.
Yeah.
To me, it's almost like I'm not a scholar, so don't take it wrong. I'm just being critical, right, and saying what I think. And what I think is, it's like there's so many of these Messiah type people that have come around, people even that are equated to Jesus in Acts, that are like guys that are leading people astray, that people are following. I'm going to split the Jordan River. We're going to defeat the Romans. Don't worry. All these things that are happening. And you have Josephus's account of real crap happening with Messiah-like figures that are failures. And then Bar Kokhba comes after Josephus, and it's almost like, to me, could it be about it? Sure. It's just like, how would you know? There's so many of these people coming
because
on.
they were because all of the messianic claimants, even in the first century, are also considered deceivers.
Right.
So it's a standard trope.
Which was one of my issues when I heard of Professor Eisenman's view. Don't get me wrong, he could be right. I mean, I don't know. But when he runs against carbon dating pertaining to the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm no expert. I'm just pointing out, like, all right, they never really mention people by name. Everything is nameless. There's code names, people of light, people of darkness, sons of the enemy, liars, deceivers. All these things are like generic terms that could be used today about people. So to say this is first century and Paul is the liar and the deceiver, what if that's just a trope? How do we know this isn't first or second century BC, around the time of or BCE, around the time after the Maccabean revolt that takes place? How do we not know that there were similar claimants that were going on, that this growing development that's taking place? And this trope's been going on for 400 years, let's say 300-400 years. They've been running around saying, you're a liar, you're a son of darkness, and the same thing's going on. It's in the air. It's hard for me to say, we know who, and we know when, and we know how. It's complicated.
Right. Well, I accept the general dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls myself, but then again, I think that some scholars have been too harsh on Eisenman, because I take a middle position, which is that, well, whereas I don't accept his dating, I do think that scholarship in general tends to not see the actual degree that some of the Dead Sea Scrolls did influence the early Jesus movement.
Right.
Right? And so, right, so James, I don't see him anywhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I do see some agreements and some parallels. So I do think some of the Qumran or even the non-sectarian writings, right, that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Influenced.
known, right, to people in that early movement, the Jesus movement. And so you can make a connection between the scrolls and the early Jesus movement in that way. At least that's my take. A lot of scholars would agree with me, I think, but then some, of course, there would be different disagreement on the degree, right, to which some of these texts have influenced, let's say, certain New Testament texts or other early texts.
I got a buddy, Christopher Lawson, who's a huge fan of Eisenman for a long time. And I even did an interview with him. Eisenman's, getting up there in age, so to do interviews with him, it's difficult. But he will be remembered, obviously, as a legend in his research. One of the things that Christopher Lawson did bring up is linguistic similarities between the sectarian Dead Sea Scroll text and Paul. And what he did is not that Paul's using the same linguistic similarities in the same way, he flips them on their head. So he goes and shows that he's using the sectarian children of light, children of darkness, these similar motifs that you'd find in the sectarian literature, but he makes who they are the opposite. Almost like he's taking what the children of light would be as these Torah observant, strict sectarian Jews who are pure, holy, clean, and really about, God and law, and the enemy is Rome. And he makes the people who are pro-Roman more Hellenistic, more open to eating non-kosher, let's get along with our neighbor type thing, and our neighbor is Rome. And makes them children of light, whereas children of light before were sectarian, holy, separatist, and whatnot, and xenophobic even at times. And so I just thought that was interesting. I don't know this. I'm just telling you what he says, because I haven't actually researched it.
There's even some striking parallels, right, in language between some of the Dead Sea Scrolls and even the Deutero-Pauline letters. Right, but I mean, what's it may be just coincidence, or it may be in some roundabout way. That's not necessarily any direct literary connection going on there. But I mean, they're definitely right. Even in the Deutero-Pauline literature, you'll find some striking, agreements.
Well, let me ask you one last question on this. I think this is an important one. All right, this Simon Bar Kokhba, Simon Bar Kokhba, he is a messianic figure, claim it, whether he claimed it himself or others. Let's just say that doesn't matter. Let's just say it doesn't matter. Either way, he was known to be something like that kind of figure. Jesus, not the Christianity Jesus, not the deified, mythologized Jesus we have, but what we would think of a historical Jesus, if there was one, the one that you would say is a rebel-like messianic type claimant, whether he was really going to go to battle Rome or whether he thought we just got to start it and the angels of God will come, whatever. What are the similarities between these two figures, if you don't mind, in real history?
Yeah, in real history. Well, I mean, that's as I intimated before, that's complicated by the fact that we don't have a more or less contemporary historical account of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which we do have for the first Jewish war, right, from Josephus. So, with that qualification, you could just spend time and try to make a list, like the first come up is that, well, all right, one similarity is that there are a lot of scholars who think Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah, that was a claim put into his mouth only later. A lot of scholars, if not most scholars, who do think that Bar Kokhba was thought of as the Messiah, would probably believe that he didn't think of himself as the Messiah. Did that to him. I tend to think, though, that Bar Kokhba probably did think of himself as the Messiah. And because one of the reasons why a lot of scholars say, well, no, he couldn't have, is because we, as you may know, we have several actual letters from Bar Kokhba, that were found in caves, right? So we have actual letters, right? And these having to do about daily operations for the military, and also, well, where the citron and the lola for the Feast of Tabernacle, for the Feast of Tabernacles, we need that. So obviously he's a spiritual person. He's a traditional Jew. He's also a military leader. But most scholars that I've read say, well, look, I mean, he's a military leader talking about everyday things. He couldn't not have thought of himself as the Messiah. But you see, that's a really biased way of looking at things, as if the Messiah, in Jewish way of understanding, could not be a figure like that, who is just someone who could write letters. I mean, if he's a war leader, he's going to have to write letters about orders and what to do with this group of prisoners or whatever. I mean, just because he's talking about everyday things, he can't be the Messiah. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Jewish perspective doesn't make any sense. So he could have thought of himself as the Messiah. We will never know. It could be that he didn't until he got into the war and he got into the thick of it, right? And we can't know, right? But one thing is for sure: he was a so-called seditionist. Right? He took the sword. He fought. As far as Jesus goes, what we do know is that he was executed for being a seditionist,
right,
for wanting to do what Bar Kokhba did. Now, of course, Christians will object to that and say, well, that is why he was executed, but there were false charges.
Right, and that's the problem. You get to Celsus, you get to these guys who are debating with Origen and other contra Celsus and whatnot. And I'm glad that we have preservations of their work. I mean, this is speculation, but it's an interesting speculation that makes a lot of sense. And my good friend Dave Allen mentions this. He believes that he was using maybe the Testimonium Flavinium that was obviously not the one we have. Of course, he has a negative one. He believes that was like a reconstructed version, but with the perspective, and I just launched today your video on the Testimonium. So if it is negative, it makes sense. If you look at what just happened around the time of Origen, you see this guy, Bar Kokhba, come up and you're like, dude, all of Rome has got seditionist written all over the place. Like, guys like this are seditionists. They're bad guys. They're robbers. They're this, according to the perspective of Rome. The Romans are looking at them like terrorists. And so here you have, Celsus, who's obviously in line with the Roman view, that perspective. And he's telling these other guys, your Jesus is a seditionist. He's a sophist. He's someone who's tricking the people, and he's got a band of robbers and thieves with him. He's arguing against someone like Origen. Do you think Bar Kokhba played an influence on the mindset of someone like Celsus when writing on behalf of arguing against Jesus? And he sees Jesus just like he sees Bar Kokhba and these other...
Sure. He's looking at it not as a Jewish Christian thing, really. Well, to a certain extent he is, but what he's saying is that, the lead up to that is, those 2 and actually 3 Jewish wars, in the past, in the 60s and 70s, and then in the one 15 to 17, the Caiclos War, and then 132 to 136, the Bar Kokhba revolt. So these series of Jewish uprisings, So he is linking Jesus to that series, as being and in anticipation, at an earlier period, So sure, yeah, yes, that's exactly how Celsus is thinking, right? Of the origins of Christianity, and of course, I think he's well aware that the Christian movement at that time, the vast majority of it, right, so the great church is called the Pauline type of movement, right? They're probably pretty oblivious to it all, right?
Wow.
The actual true history of how it all started. And but he believes he has the real history from Roman history. Books like Josephus, and then afterwards, of course, Dio Cassius writes about Bar Kokhba, but long after the event. Yeah.
I wonder if there's more we just don't have, like in
Well, some of
Tacitus.
Celsus sources would be Jewish sources that were reacting against Jews who were joining the Jesus movement and abandoning Judaism. We can talk about that.
Yeah,
So he had other sources that some scholars have sort of dug up, right, and
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I don't know, is there anything else you'd like to say on this topic before we go?
No, that's everything. I appreciate your interest.
Yes, sir.
In my work.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, go down in the description, show Dr. Zinner some love, and I really do appreciate you joining me on the show. And don't forget, we are MythVision.